Welcome back to You Must Be Woking, the podcast where we have honest and sometimes tough conversations on the topic of diversity and inclusion with her, Dawn Hurst.
And him, Craig Richards.
In today's episode, when everyone else seems to be talking about AI, we're going to be exploring and talking about EI, emotional intelligence, what it is, and if it really is important in today's workplace. And finally, can it really enhance company culture and performance? But before we start, shall we catch up?
Yeah, let's have gossip.
How you been?
Yeah, really good. Moved house since I saw you last. Yes.
Hurst Towers now then?
Hurst Towers, absolutely. Yeah, loving life. Back home with all my old school friends and all my mates. So,
lovely.
Yeah, all good.
Oh, and how's it going? Are you settling in all right?
Yeah, nothing that 17 contractors couldn't sort out, but yeah, all good.
You're literally having them in one by one, you just sort everything out for
beauty parade of contractors. It's brilliant. Yeah, so
you're not a DIY person, I think it's fair to say, right?
No, I've struggled to open a tin now. I'm on my own, so just to be clear, but yeah, it's getting there. What about you?
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for my invite to your new house.
Absolutely. Well, bring a screwdriver. I'll have you.
I'm probably about as good as you are with DIY, to be fair. I usually get my brother-in-law around.
Bring him in, that's fine.
I say to Lisa, hey Lisa, do you fancy coming over for dinner? Can you bring Paul in his toolbox, please?
Love that.
Yeah, no, I'm good. All really good, actually. Busy. We're going on holiday in a couple of weeks, so I'm really looking forward to that. We're taking the kids off to Spain for a week, so that'd be nice. Just to have a bit of a break in the sun, so that should be good. Yeah, Jake's doing really good as well at the minute, although this morning, I've been in a hotel this morning and he was faking a headache. Well, I say he was faking a headache. He looked awful, but I was pretty sure he was faking it because he has cricket today on a Tuesday and he's not a big fan of cricket. So I was getting the whole, Dad, I don't feel very well.
Oh, we've all been there.
But anyway, I said, get him off to school, and off he went. And then when I text home and said, how did he get on today? Yeah, he's absolutely fine. He's out on the trampoline bouncing away. So.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
bless his heart.
Good.
It's worth a try.
But it was worth a try. I mean, we've all done it, I suppose. Good. Should we get into it then? Let's talk about EI. So as always, we like to start the episode with a news article that relates to the topic we're going to talk about. So this article was from Forbes magazine, talking about some research that has shown that emotional intelligence is now the number one skill for leadership for the year ahead. And the research come from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, which stated that the qualities associated with emotional intelligence, such as resilience, curiosity, lifelong learning, motivation, and self-awareness, are highly prized by businesses and will continue to be for the years to come. In a Penna survey conducted in 2019, it revealed that out of 500 people managers, an estimated 75% now use emotional intelligence levels as criteria for considering a team member for promotion or a salary increase. Wow. It's quite a lot, right?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts then? So what are we saying, AI or EI? What's your preference?
Oh, depends on the day of the week. No, joking. EI every day.
Yeah.
And, some of this stuff is not new. It's just badged differently.
Yeah.
But
I remember years ago, they used to call it EQ, didn't they? Yeah, it was EQ, but it's now kind of monikered EI more than EQ.
Absolutely. And they're basic traits that we should use in the day-to-day, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's a topic I've been coaching for years and years in the leaders I work with. And I tend to use a particular pattern. But you can often spot those who do and those who don't.
Yeah, we should probably hint at some tips as to how to spot somebody with a low EI. But actually, most people already probably know that person who has very little emotional intelligence in their lives. They probably know it loud and clear. But why don't we start with the what is it conversation, because I think some people may not be familiar with the concept of emotional intelligence, and therefore, what do we mean when we talk about that? So, and I'm asking you because I would imagine we've both got a different take on
methods,
this, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no set description of what EI is, but we may both have similar but differing descriptors of that. So why don't you kick us off, and then maybe I'll see if it
Sure.
chimes with me.
So I use a mechanism that looks at the 5 headlines, really.
Yeah.
So I would start with things like being self-aware. So what I mean by that is literally being aware of yourself, self-confidence, how you're perceived, those kinds of things. Self-regulation is my next one, and this is a big one.
Love that one.
This is my self-control. This might be how can somebody trust me? Can I adapt? Can I be innovative? Those kinds of things in terms of self-control. How do I handle conflict, for example? Motivation, the obvious stuff. How can I achieve? How can I commit? Empathy. Do I understand? Am I developing? Am I listening? And then finally, my social skills. Can I communicate? Can I influence? Those are the constructs I tend to work with.
No, I'd agree with all of those. I think there's probably a bit of resilience in there as well for me. I think that's quite an important one. But, when I often describe what do we mean by emotional intelligence, I always usually describe it as the ability to be aware of and to control and express your thoughts and feelings, and to do it in a way that allows you to better, more effectively engage and manage relationships with other people. Because that's the key bit for me. And then particularly when emotions are strong and heightened, right? Because it's all well and good us being able to regulate ourselves or even being able to spot our own emotions and how they're making us feel. How we regulate them when we're engaging with somebody else, particularly when emotions are high, is the important bit for me around emotional intelligence. Can you read the room and understand that emotions are high and therefore we have to look internally as well as externally at that environment? And so many leaders can't do that. They can't read the room and they just plow on as normal. And that for me is probably the big thing that I look at for emotional intelligence.
I agree. I think that self-regulation one is massive.
Yeah. The other thing I think for me is I'm not overly bothered whether people label this stuff as emotional intelligence either, because we all have different names.
It's been called all sorts over the last 30 years.
But essentially, I think what we're all agreed on is that communication is a vital skill, particularly for leaders, but actually is a good skill for anybody working in an organization. And emotional intelligence is essentially the way we communicate and being able to communicate better. So if we want to communicate better, build emotional intelligence and you'll be able to. That's the key bit for me.
And I think that's supported with lots of tools, things like I always talk about in coaching, the emotions wheel. We use such basic language when we're describing emotion. I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm angry, but we don't expand that language. And therefore, we are very limited on how we describe emotion. And therefore, it's very difficult for people to relate and then regulate themselves.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. There's a really good quote from a book on emotional intelligence called Primal Leadership by a chap called Daniel Goleman. So you're probably familiar with him. It's not just Daniel Goleman. There's a couple of other people involved, but he's the one that's most famous for the book. And his quote is, "No creature can fly with just one wing. Gifted leadership occurs where heart and head, feeling and thought meet. There are 2 wings that allow a leader to soar." And I love that because actually it is about engaging both the heart and the head. And for years and years, we've been told as leaders, take the emotion out of what you're doing, take the emotion out of it and, just use your head. But actually, we're human. We can't, right? We all have a heart. We all have feelings. We all have emotions. And the trick is not to ignore that or try and pretend it doesn't exist. The trick is to be able to connect the two and still make informed decisions, but get the balance right between the two. Don't let one overrule the other and get the emotion connection with the decisions you make or with the conversations you have. And that's why I really love that quote, because it almost says, actually, if you want to be a real leader, you have to be able to connect the two. You can't just do one or the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful.
Undoubtedly. If you think about some of the most conflicting or the most demanding situations you've been in as a leader, you've perhaps had to use 10 different skills, not 2.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think it's not about ignoring your emotions. It's not about ignoring other people's emotions. Sometimes it's about leaning in to those things. And actually, that's where you make better connections, where you have better communications. That's where the magic happens, right?
Absolutely. And this is back to the being human, isn't it? To be able to lean into somebody and talk about your own personal weakness when you're demonstrating empathy in the right occasion can be hugely impactful, but we're not naturally good at that.
Yeah. And I guess the bit that I really love about emotional intelligence is that you can learn it.
Yeah.
It's not a kind of one and done thing. So I always think of IQ, so traditional kind of intelligence, as you're either really gifted and you've got an extremely high IQ or you're not. And yes, you can learn new skills and you can learn new things, but it doesn't naturally move your IQ level up as a result of that. Whereas actually EQ is very different to that. It's much more dynamic. You can improve daily. You can improve over a period of a week, over a period of hours. The more you practice tuning in to your emotions and other people's emotions, the better you get at reading the room, at reading people.
Absolutely. Take self-control as an example. You observe people who are self-controlled and are working hard to be self-controlled, and you can learn so much, that ability to take a moment. Let's take a break. Let's deflect the situation for a moment while I control myself. All of those things.
And that point about, if you can match EQ with IQ, match EQ with experience, match EQ with knowledge that's rich in your sector. Wow, that's like a superpower, right? Oh. You just turbocharge your leadership then.
It's the difference between good and great, isn't it?
100%, yeah. And I love it because you can also measure it.
Yes.
So as practitioners in this space, we like things that you can measure. We like to be able to measure impact. And actually with EQ, you can actually measure it. You can talk about, the leaders you're working with. And we do that through the coaching that we do, through the leadership development work that we do. We can measure the impact of EQ on the individual, on their team, on their organization. That is really measurable as well. And that just music to my ears about emotional intelligence.
It is. And, this is all badged up when you think about leadership as a whole. As a leader, you're told to be motivational. I always think that's one of the most difficult things to say to a leader. You're going to go and motivate your team. Well, okay. Well, no, come on, team. And when you actually dig into how to motivate a team, there are probably 100 different things you need to do.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit then about how to spot emotional intelligence, either the positive or the negative. Because I guess whenever I go into an organization, particularly for the first time, and I'm meeting with leaders or with, employees of an organization, I'm assessing straight away the level of EQ or EI in an organization. And I kind of do it subconsciously, but actually I also do it physically. And people often say to me, well, how do you know then? How do you measure it? And I say, well, actually, the answer is really simple. I actually keep a tally, right? Yes. So I have a list of kind of questions. And as I'm walking around, I'm asking myself these questions and I'm tallying up when I see evidence of these questions. So if you were to take that set of questions and you give it to a leader and say, measure yourself, they can measure their own EQ, right? So they can see where they currently fit. And you can do it with a simple scale of 1 to 5. 1, I'm rubbish. 5, I'm great at this. And, that's an easy fix. Or like we do when we go into organizations, keep that tally. So I'm going to share a couple of the questions that I kind of use and I listen out for when I'm within an organization, but I'll read them as if I'm an individual assessing myself. So, do I get stressed easily or often? So if I'm walking around an organization and I hear that, oh, so-and-so stressed, or this is happening, that's a tally, right? And I'm keeping tallies how many times I hear that. For an individual, you just ask yourself that question. How often am I feeling stressed? How often? And does it happen often? And does it happen easily? That's a really good sign of work needed to be done. Is there limited emotional vocabulary? And what I mean by that is, do people struggle to articulate how they're feeling about something? So again, if I'm a leader, do I struggle to tell people, look, I'm feeling this today and I need this from you today? Is that common language or is it uncommon? Because if it's uncommon, then we probably got a bit of work to do. Same principle, if I'm walking around an organization, I'm interviewing people, meeting with people, and people are struggling to articulate how they feel about others, how they feel about their work, and they have limited vocabulary around that, that's usually a sign that EI is low in an organization, I think. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think there's some more as well.
I've got more. I keep going if you like. You chip in though if you've got more. You want to steal my thunder?
I think it's, for me, there's some physical ones.
Oh, go on then.
So when I'm meeting a new leader and assessing them, I want to see whether they're leading from the front or from behind.
Yeah.
And whether they're leading through their team. And that comes from language like I and we, and also how they're describing, when they're doing the showcase walk round, how they're describing the business. And also that interaction on that first meeting when somebody walks in a room and panics because the boss is in there and scurries off out. Yeah. That tells me loads.
I would agree with that. Do you know what I find always fascinating as well is when that first meeting or that first walk around is choreographed within an inch of its life, right? So they knew I was coming and they're putting on their best frock or they're putting on their best show, right? Because they want to make this impression. And actually all that tells me is I need to dig deeper.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just almost like they may as well have hung a red flag above the door.
The cup of tea is sitting waiting for you.
Because then I'm like, really? Is it always like this?
Yeah,
It just makes me want to dig deeper. Yeah, I love that. A couple of others that I had then was things like grudges. So if people talk about incidences or things that have happened and I feel like they're clinging on to that or they're clinging on to those grudges, that's usually a sign that EI is a bit low in this organization or these, for an individual. Again, if I'm coaching somebody and they talk about, I don't like that person, we don't get on because of X, again, it's a sign for me that perhaps we need to do a bit of work on some EQ, EI. Do people struggle to let go of mistakes, both their own and other people's? So I hear quite a lot in organizations, Craig made that mistake a while ago and it still hangs around today and people still talk about it. We need to make sure we don't do that. That's usually a sign for me that there's a need to do a bit of work around emotional intelligence because we all make mistakes, right? And if we're creating psychologically safe environments, what do we care, right? That's a good sign for me as well. Do I blame other people for how they make me feel? And this links back to your triggers point you mentioned a bit earlier on. And I'm fascinated by triggers, right? Because particularly if you've got a leader with lower EI, then they do tend to blame other people for how they're feeling. So I was chatting to Dawn today and she made me so cross. Right. And I always then say to people, let's just pause for a second. Let's reflect for a minute on what it is about what Dawn said that made you cross.
Yeah.
So let's worry less about what Dawn said or did and worry a little bit more about why it's triggered you. Because if we understand what the trigger is, then you can manage that a bit more. And by proxy, you become more emotionally intelligent and more emotionally aware of what your triggers are and how to manage them. But most people don't do that. They focus on the other person. Yes. And I think it's much more powerful when we self-reflect on why was it what Dawn said triggered me to feel the way I felt. Yeah. Which, you do on a daily basis, but I'm joking. And then my final one around this kind of how to spot this is when people are easily offended by things.
Yes.
And it's quite links nicely into the kind of inclusion, diversity, language thing that we have going on at the moment, right? People get really offended really easy in 2025. It seems to be a thing. But actually, I think that's a sign that our emotional intelligence is not as strong as it could be when we're really easily offended by what things people say or what things people do. And, actually, if we were more emotionally aware and more emotionally intelligent, we would be thinking about why is it that I'm offended by what somebody have said? And did they really mean that? And asking ourselves some more reflective questions as opposed to being overtly offended by everything.
But I think that also comes back to having that self-controlled conflict, because we're afraid of conflict. And to be clear, I'm not talking about an aggressive conflict. I'm talking about the ability to challenge, disagree, have a robust conversation, and then close that conversation down positively. But because we're afraid of being cancelled or stepping over the line, we have lost that ability to remain self-controlled.
Yeah, I love that. And I often talk about, when I'm working with leadership teams in particular, I often talk about the fact that some of the best teams that I've ever worked with around the world are the ones where tension is high.
Absolutely.
Right? And they will disagree, and they would, there's tension in the meetings.
Diamonds are made in pressure.
Exactly that. And I'm always reminded of an old video that Steve Jobs, there's a video going around from Steve Jobs, and he talked about some neighbor of his was tumbling rocks in a little machine. And he was saying that kind of rubbing up against each other created diamonds.
Yeah.
And for every team that Steve Jobs ever led, he started with this story about the rocks in the tumbler, because he wanted the leaders to understand that actually, when we rub against each other, when we have that tension, that push and pull, that's when we create the diamonds. That's when we get to the magic and the good stuff. And I do exactly the same now. When I'm working with leadership teams, I talk to them about, you have to create an environment where you can bump up against each other and rub and create that tension. Because when you do that, that's where the magic is.
Absolutely.
But you can only do that if people are emotionally intelligent.
Absolutely. And safe.
And safe, yeah. So if they feel safe, psychologically safe, and they are emotionally intelligent enough to know that actually that pressure, that rub is coming from a good place, then it'll be okay, right? Because it's about improvement. It's about getting us better. It's about us working together as a team. And actually, when we're finished, we can close the conversation down and we can leave the room and be united, and we can still be the strongest team going. But in the room, it's good, right? Yeah. It's a good thing for us to do.
Absolutely that.
Yeah, I love that. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about with leaders as well. Okay, so what else should we talk about from an EI perspective?
Trust. I always think this is massive. Can I trust you? Can you trust me? What do I do to demonstrate that? How do I build trust? What's the trust triangle?
Yeah.
All of these elements are critical and so easily broken.
100%. And I love all the different trust models, and there's quite a few, right? So there's different ones that I use. There's the trust equation that I use with individuals in a team that talks about that credibility, reliability, intimacy divided by how much I'm in it for myself, that self-orientation bit. That's a really good model for trust for an individual within a team environment. Then you've got things like trust triangles, and there's a number of different trust triangles. And I use those more when I'm talking to the whole team, because I think that's helpful. But my favorite one, particularly around culture, is the trust triangle that has the kind of 3 equal sides. And it talks about, if we let any of these equal sides fall over, then that's where trust breaks down, or that's where trust then becomes a bit more challenging for us. So we need to make sure that we're kind of navigating these things or preventing them from falling over in the right way. And it links, the most important one in that kind of triangle is empathy. And it links to what you were saying earlier about emotionally intelligent leaders can develop empathy and about helping people understand, we get it. We understand how challenging it is, and, that kind of stuff. And it's one of the fundamental pillars of trust for me.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an underestimated part of emotional intelligence, even down to the basics. I'm working with a client at the moment, which is a high gossip culture. And a piece of information that starts fairly innocuous, 3 weeks later, I'm hearing it as a massive issue, simply because people are thriving off adding a bit of juice to the story, and the impact of that is massive dereliction of trust.
Yeah. And I should probably finish that by saying that empathy is one of the key factors of that. Intimacy is another one. So, do people feel safe with me? Am I going to, am I in it for them? Am I in it for me? What does that kind of level of intimacy is? And then the third one on that triangle is logic.
Yeah.
And I love this because we can't really help people with their logic. Your logic either makes sense or it doesn't, right? But what we can help people with is how they describe their logic or how they communicate their logic.
Yeah.
And that's the bit for me that's really important in a trust triangle. If your logic doesn't make sense, we can't help that. But if your logic does make sense, how you communicate your logic to other people is really important. And I often say to leaders, start with the point, right? So I'm a meanderer. So I start talking and I go like this, ooh, and then eventually I get to my point. It's just a habit. But actually, when I'm in an environment where I'm trying to demonstrate trust with a client or with, my team, I start with my point. And then I meander. Because if I get cut off, I've already made the point.
Yes.
Particularly important for women who tend to get kind of cut off when they're chatting. If you make your point at the beginning, they can't steal your credit, ladies.
Yeah. Let me finish. No, I agree entirely. I mean, I think the logic element of that is incredibly important, because if we go back to self-control and we go back to reacting in the moment, if we base that on fact, we're much more likely to be controlled than if we're basing it on emotion, which comes back to controlling emotion.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not about turning it off. No. It's about understanding your triggers.
Yeah.
And therefore, once you understand what your triggers are, you control them in a way that's meaningful, or you steer clear of something that's going to provoke your emotions in a different way.
Exactly that. And emotion is really a powerful tool in a leader, if it's controlled. And to show that vulnerability and to show that ability to be human is a critical part of emotional intelligence.
It is these days as well, right? So we talk quite a lot about, in 2025, it's very different styles of leadership that gets results than what it was in 1985 or 1995 or even 2005, right?
Oh, yes.
So, it's a very different style. I remember people, and I've said this before, but training people with that command and control style leadership. So no weakness, have all the answers, right? And
Don't
here we
tell
are.
anybody you've got children.
Yeah, and now here we are saying, no, lead with authenticity, be emotionally intelligent, all of that kind of stuff. Easy to say, very much harder to do when you don't have the tools or the training to help you get there. And that's the point, right? Which is why I love emotional intelligence so much, is because you can learn it and you can measure it and you can see how you're progressing with that as well.
You can, if you're strong, self-aware.
Yeah, but as an organization, you can help individuals. You can put scaffolding for people to become self-aware, right?
Yeah. And sometimes that has to be quite direct.
Yeah. And there are ways you can do that, which is more subtle, but also allows you to be direct. So 360s are a great way to raise self-awareness for an individual. And if you're particularly keen on emotional intelligence, make sure that's in 360. Exactly. Get people from around the organization to give somebody feedback on how they present themselves. It's a great way to raise self-awareness. And then it's a great way for somebody to think, okay, I need to make some changes here and I can do things differently. Yeah. I love those kind of assessment bits as well.
Definitely.
The other one I wanted to talk about is the why, right? So I've done some, I pulled up some stats as to why is this important, right? Why, not just because Craig and Dawn are sat here telling you it's important, but why else is it important? So I pulled up some stats. So the first one is, according to McKinsey, organizations led by emotionally intelligent leaders see 20% higher profitability as a result.
It's a pretty good reason why.
Not a bad stat, right? No. Take that if you could get it. Obviously, you need to make sure it's applicable to your organization, but a good stat if you can make that work for you. The second one I thought was really good, and there are millions of these stats, by the way. I just pulled out 3 important ones for me. What resonated with me? So research by Forbes shows that 70% of employees perform better under managers with higher EQ.
Yeah.
So if you want your team to be more productive and more efficient, etc., then lead them with emotional intelligence. Great way to do it. And then finally, and this is the one that I thought everybody will want to hear, is according to Talent Smart, people with a higher IQ earn £29,000 more annually.
Oh, Amazing.
So there you go.
Let's just practice.
Another 29 grand and you can...
Ka-ting.
Yeah, there you go. But I thought it was right interesting because there are a variety of different, statistics that show why emotional intelligence is important. But they're not all applicable for every individual, but you can pick ones that work for you and then see if you can make that a benefit for your organization. So, for example, if you think you want employees to perform better and you train your managers, if you do something around emotional intelligence, measure it and see if you're achieving that benefit, that stat the Forbes say you can. Let's measure ourselves against it specifically. Or if your stat is we want higher profitability, then let's focusing on emotional intelligence and then we can measure whether we're achieving that profitability as a result of that. Don't just take a blanket, here are all the benefits, we're going to suddenly achieve them. Let's focus our plans around one or two of them that are relevant for us.
And I think that's a really good point. And because we're seeing more and more focus on behavioural interviewing or situational judgment testing, for example, there's a real opportunity to test that right from the beginning of an application or a recruitment process to make sure that you're increasing the EI across your business.
Yeah. So there's another good stat that I pulled out, and it links to this kind of recruitment and how we respond to some of that stuff. And nearly 3/4, so 72% of UK managers have reported that emotional skills should be one of the top 5 most important capabilities when hiring managers. There's nothing I can argue with that. No. However, there's a counter stat to that says half, so 50% of the 2,000 UK managers that were surveyed said they did not receive any support from their organisation when transitioning into a managerial job. And this is something I bang on about all of the time.
Well, it's pink, fluffy, soft stuff, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. We promote these people, we give them no training and support, and then we go, they're emotionally unintelligent or their EQ is low.
And 74 grievances.
Yeah. Oh, you haven't trained them. Why? Help them. But I thought that was really interesting. So, everybody thinks it's really important, but everybody also then says, but we've had no training to help us with that.
And I think this is, the programs we run on emotional intelligence and the coaching we do specifically on emotional intelligence have had such impact on the people involved in them. It's such a specific skill, though, isn't it?
No, 100%. And I think it is so important. And if you're going to use it in recruitment in particular, particularly internal promotions, you have to then be able to provide the training, support and help for people to improve because it is improvable. You can make it better and you can measure the impact of it too, which is why I love it so much. And it's not like a machine either that has to learn from everything else. This is humans and we can learn this stuff really, really well. So love that. Okay, shall we do the so what bit? Shall we look into what is it that organizations can and should do if they want to test whether their emotional intelligence is high or whether they want to focus on creating more emotional intelligence in their organization? What are the kind of tips that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the first is to acknowledge it based on what you've just said, and to recognize it as a key component of strategy. So that's the first one. The second is to measure it. And, there's lots of reasonably valid and reliable ways to do that through survey or engagement, for example. Or a more effective way is to do some primary research around emotional intelligence. I know it's something we do a lot of in terms of one-to-ones or listening groups, for example. The other thing is to recognise this as a key skill, weave it through all structures, systems and processes, and then teach people how to spot it. Educate people in what it looks like, what not so good looks like, and help and support people to improve.
Yeah, I love that. And it's actually one of the things we do on culture scans for an organization, isn't it? When we're looking at that kind of what's the culture of an organization, one of the things that we're looking at is that emotional intelligence level. Are leaders leading through emotional intelligence, or are they kind of steering away from that? Is it low? Absolutely. Is it high? What does that kind of look like? Not just overall, but in specific teams, because you can see, there's a hotspot. Let's go and have a look. And in that hotspot, there's a lack of emotional intelligence. It's a really easy fix often for culture and for challenges. So when we know there's a lack of emotional intelligence, we can kind of parachute in, give it some support, some scaffolding, and the turnaround is pretty quick as a result of doing some of that as well. So I think it's a really good point you made, and that's why we kind of cover it in culture scans. If I was going to say to an organization or a person, the one thing, if they were just going to do one thing on emotional intelligence, it would be understanding the triggers.
Yeah, control.
That's the thing for me. And there's a really nice saying around this: what triggers you teaches you.
Yeah.
And this is why emotional intelligence is a teachable topic, is because when we know what triggers us, that teaches us so much about our own emotions and other people.
Yeah.
That it's actually a huge step forward for people in terms of their emotional intelligence. So I think if we can understand what triggers us, that teaches us then how we can manage our own emotions and be mindful of other people and how the situations we put ourselves in and what support we need, all of that kind of good stuff as well. So that's my number one tip is understand what it is that triggers you, and then you can really step forward with your own emotional intelligence.
Yeah, love that.
I did have a couple of other things that organizations can do, and I think these are other education topics that you can focus in on, or skills that you can build into your capability assessments or into your leadership frameworks, all of these kind of things. And so thing for me around that, empathy and resilience. So those two things are quite big ones for an organization to focus on. They're quite big skills that you need to kind of develop or continually develop, I would argue.
Yeah, I think the resilience one, in fact, we were talking about this earlier, particularly in an interesting economic climate, are critical for any leader to be able to adapt in a resilient way. Attaches very closely to mindset and being able to be calm and resilient in that environment. But I think that's a key one.
We see that a lot in startups, right? So startups, they are off and running and they're exciting and it's all really good and everyone's really happy and everything's really good and everything's trundling along. And then bam, they get hit by something that's unexpected, an economic downturn, or, a derailed product or a product launch that's gone wrong. And suddenly everybody's running around like headless chickens. Leaders aren't leading. They're getting tied up and everyone's arguing. Emotional intelligence hits the floor. And it's usually because we haven't weathered those kind of big bang things before. We're used to a happy environment and our resilience isn't strong, and our mindset in navigating resilience and empathy and all of these good things is low. And all of these things lead to this kind of lack of emotional intelligence. And if we can spend a bit of time in the good years training our leaders on emotional intelligence, when those things happen that derail us, when those negative, because they will happen, right? Every organization has downturns. Every organization has tough times. If we've spent the time in the good times training emotional intelligence, resilience, empathy, when the bad things happen, our leaders will be strong enough to respond in the right way.
Absolutely.
Authenticity is another one. We talk about this quite a lot. So I think that's quite a big one for emotional intelligence. You have to be authentic.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think, consistency sits alongside authenticity.
Yeah.
Same on a Thursday as you are on a Monday, and being comfortable to be yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And then my final tip for organizations, and we've talked about it just a second ago, is regular assessments.
Yes.
So it isn't a one and done.
No.
And this is the thing. Most organizations might go, oh yeah, I did a 360 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Like that, what use was that? It might have told you something 3 years ago, but it doesn't tell you something today. So those regular assessments of how we're being perceived in the organization by our teams, by our colleagues, by other departments are really important ways. And that's why I'm a big fan of organizations who have 360 mechanisms that they can run themselves, right? They don't necessarily need an external company to come in and do that for them, because you should do them more regularly. So buy a bit of software that allows you to do 360s and do it regularly, because A, it's more economical, but actually B, it's really important to help people navigate that emotional intelligence levels within the organization. Because if you're getting those feedback loops, and you talked about feedback loops earlier, if they're getting those feedback loops in a regular way, 360s are a great way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other one that I really like, and I'm a bit biased here because I'm a practitioner in this, is the insights model, which helps people understand their own personality traits, their own behaviors, and how to navigate that with other people that have might differ in personality traits or preferences. And the insights model leans into the kind of, yes, I might have a more preference towards one color, but actually I've got all the colors, which is why I really like it. It means you can dial them up and down according to who you're working with, which links really well into emotional intelligence.
And self-awareness, yeah.
Exactly, right? Because you're saying, look, I'm working with Dawn today. Dawn is much more detail orientated, needs more facts, figures. So me dashing in and doing something in 30 seconds isn't going to work. Therefore, my emotional intelligence is telling me I need to dial up my preference towards detail for this meeting. Yeah. If we can help people in our organizations learn that and understand that, wow.
Efficiency is huge.
Yeah, it's magic, right? That's where we get those benefits, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, anything else you think we should be telling employers to think about?
The only thing I would add to all of that comes back to communication. Clear, concise, effective communication, not shying away from difficult conversations, handling conflicts. All of that is the thread that runs through it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's important for particularly senior leadership teams, whether that's at executive level or whether it's at senior level. Those teams as leadership groups should have some time away from the business in some kind of away day or workshop where they can do some more reflection and spend time reflecting on what's gone well, what could have been better, how do we think our people are feeling? Yes. Because it allows you to kind of lean into these emotions of the organization. So if things have gone badly over the last 6 months, let's reflect on that. What did it do to our emotions? What did it do to the emotions of the team? Did we respond in the right way? If things have gone really well, same questions. How did it affect us? What did we do? What did our behaviors happen? How did our teams respond? And then that general question about where are our teams right now? How are they feeling about the organization? Are they pumped up, ready to go for the next 6 months? Or do we need to do some work around motivating them, helping them, setting clear expectations, these kind of things? And leaders underestimate how important that time away is for them, for the business, because I genuinely think it's so important that you take some time out together as a team and you think blue sky, you do that thinking, you do that reflecting. Because when you go back to the business with the changed mindset, you can really start to tap into some of that intelligence.
Massive.
So that would be my other final tip is don't underestimate the power of those away days. They're huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the point in the show then where we're going to hand over the microphone to our listeners with their questions. So this is the point where listeners can ask us anything they like. So we don't get sight of these questions in advance, so we have to answer them honestly and uncensored. And I think Spike is now going to bring in the questions for us today.
How exciting.
Exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Spike.
Cheers, mate. So let's see what we've got today. Okay. So from Tom on Insta. Great job on the pod, guys. I'm a new listener and currently working my way through your back catalogue. You often talk about putting appropriate scaffolding around line managers. I'm just about to promote a brilliant employee who has no experience of people management. I really want them to succeed. What things can I put in place to ensure that they are supported? A lovely question.
Great question.
Thank you, Tom. We're glad you're enjoying the pod.
Says loads about you, Tom, that you're even asking that question. I wish a lot more of our leaders would. There's lots of things you can do depending on the level of the appointment. Some real basics. Number one, give them some of your time, which clearly you're prepared to do. The second is be mindful of the competencies that they're going to need to work with people, whether that be emotional intelligence, whether that be specific skills, whether that be sharing knowledge. But also make time and be present for them, give them regular updates, coach and support them through, whether that be yourself or with a professional coach. All of those things can support.
Yeah, I love that. I would agree with everything Dawn just said. The only other thing I would add to that is maybe do a bit of a little assessment on where the individual thinks they are now or where you think they are now, so that you can track their progress. And remember, there's different skills at different levels of leadership. So this sounds like this person is about to become a people manager for the first time. So they're probably at that kind of early stage of their career. So not only are there skills they need to learn, whether that be recruiting new people, managing their peers, as an example, those are kind of new skills around delegation, things like that. They're also going to have some transition challenges.
Yeah.
So making sure that you help them navigate those transition challenges. So for example, if I'm suddenly gone from working with my peers to managing my peers, that's a big ask for individuals. So make sure they've got the tools to help them with that. And a buddy system is a really good way of doing that. So if you can't dedicate the time to them, Tom, then maybe get someone that you think is a good manager and buddy them up with that individual as well. Because realistically, we learn from what we see.
Yeah.
And so if you put them with a manager who's perhaps not as good, that's what they will learn, unfortunately. So, but I love the question, and I love the fact that you're working through the back catalogue. So thank you for the comments as well. Okay, I'll do another one because I'm conscious of time. This one's from Alice on email. Just wanted to say how much I enjoyed your In the Spotlight episode on menopause. Can you signpost me to any resources to share in my organisation about this subject? Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we'll do, we'll post in the footnote for the show some links, but there's some great organisations out there. And our advice, keep it simple and factual.
Yeah, love that. And there are a huge amount of resources. You could also ask Victoria to come and speak at your organisation, but be prepared for her to tell everybody to shout the word vulva because she made us do it. But she's fabulous. So I'm glad you enjoyed the episode, and there are a huge amount of resources, and we'll put some links on the socials and stuff for you. It's a great idea. Okay, I'm very conscious of time and we have to move on. So if you want to get in touch, don't forget you can leave us comments on the socials or email us your questions at the usual place, the You Must Be Woken podcast at metamer.com. And then now we are at our final but recurring feature.
Oh.
Woke a joke. And this is my turn. So I'm putting you on the spot now. I'm very conscious as well that we're going away together next week. So I'm at the point where I have to buy you dinner from where we were tracking scores.
Oh, I know exactly where we're going.
I think I better take my credit card with me, hadn't I? But okay, but it's my turn today. So the question is for you. Is it true that recently a local rugby club caused an outcry after advertising a derby match with a slogan saying, "Definitely not for girls"?
Ooh. I'm going to say that's true.
It is true. It is very, very true. The owner of the club and the creator of the original post very quickly came out afterwards and said, "Oh, it was just a joke. I was trying to shine a light on the casual misogyny that exists in the world." It made BBC News and everywhere else. It was actually in Wales, in Neath, so not far from me, but it was quite funny. But it did make me laugh because it reminded me of, do you remember Yorkie? The chocolate bar that used to say, "Not for girls," or whatever it was. So the Yorkie bar for boys only, or whatever it was. I used to love that. Yorkie was my favourite chocolate as a kid.
And then they introduced a pink wrappered one just to be inclusive.
For girls. And it was only for girls, which was hilarious as well. Love that. Okay, well, that's it for another episode. Thank you for joining us. We hope you have taken at least one nugget away from our episode today on emotional intelligence. Remember, emotional intelligence can be improved, can be made better. Just got to work at it, and you can measure it as well. So hope you've enjoyed it. But until next time, bye from me.
And bye from me.
Thank you for watching and listening. If you liked our discussions and our content, why not leave us a review? And so we can reach even more listeners. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe or the like buttons and the follow buttons on anywhere you get your podcasts from. You can also find us on all the social media platforms at You Must Be Woking, or just search hashtag YMB Woking, where you can continue the conversation and get involved in the chat after the show.